nos encontramos con Lizzie Phelan, que es una periodista y activista de que, bueno, estuvo hace algunos meses en Libia y que nos va a dar un testimonio pues importante, porque creo de que fue transmitida pues y vista por todo el mundo, pero ¿quién mejor que Lizzie para que nos cuente todo lo que ella vio? Y le damos la bienvenida pues a este espacio. Welcome to our show.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to speak to you. I was in Libya twice. The first time I visited on a peace delegation because the Libyan government at the time, the Jamahiriya government, had been asking the international community, in particular the United Nations, to send independent observers to witness the crimes being committed by NATO. But those calls were ignored. Of course, there was the Alba countries led by Hugo Chavez tried to send an observer mission, a peace delegation to Libya, but this was rejected, or it was ignored basically by the United Nations. And so there was a group of people like myself that wanted, you know, just to go to be a witness to NATO's crimes. So that was how I went the first time. And then on the second time, I went as a correspondent for Press TV. And I also did some reporting towards the end of my stay in Libya during the NATO and rebel invasion of Tripoli for Russia Today as well.
It was your first war, like a correspondent of an international news network?
Yes, that was.
What was the reality in that part of the world?
Well, the things that that stick with me the most are, of course, being in Tripoli for the time that I was there was the daily bombing of that city, and in certain parts of the city they would be bombed up to 50 times a day. The bombing was non-stop, day, night, although it would intensify in the night time. The other thing that stays with me a lot is the spirit of the people at the time, because of course the whole world was, as you said, saying that they were, there was like a people's uprising, but that was very far from what was happening on the ground. I was at the time the only journalist working for international news network. There were independent journalists who also were travelling around freely, that wasn't staying in the Rixos Hotel at the time, and there's very good reasons why Western journalists were kept in that hotel. In fact, I think it's quite amazing that they were even allowed in the country in the first place, given that they had been proven many times to have lied about what was happening, and also been up to some more sinister activities in the country. So every day I would visit bombing sites, meet victims of the bombings, and for me it was very surreal. Every day as well I would go to the hotel where the journalists were staying, because there would be press conferences and things like that, and it was very surreal that this was what I was witnessing. And also every day we would witness, for example, in Green Square or in Gaddafi's compound, the residents of Tripoli go to those areas, despite that Tripoli was being bombed. They would go out and they would celebrate, let off fireworks, and in particular in Gaddafi's compound, which was being bombed every day, they would go there and put on concerts to send a message to the world that even though their city was being bombed and their country was being bombed, that they would not give in, because the city was being bombed and the country was being bombed so relentlessly by NATO. There was very much this constant sense of dread amongst the people, that you know that one day you're losing people all the time, and one day it could be your family that is the next family. And I guess one of the most disgusting war crimes that I witnessed was in Zlitan, which is about 2 hours from Tripoli, to the west of Tripoli, I believe. And I think it was on August the 8th in the nighttime. British RAF planes bombed 4 houses that had been taken in refugees who had already fled from places that had already been taken by the rebels with NATO, with of course NATO's crucial support. And NATO bombed these 4 houses and killed 85 people. And NATO, the head of NATO said that they bombed those houses because it was housing mercenaries or military. But there were 33 children and 32 women and 20 men, and I went to their burial, and all of the journalists from the Western major networks saw also the destruction that was caused. And then the other things that struck me as well were the big demonstrations in support of Gaddafi, which I think the CNN only...
1 million, no?
There was one in July the 1st where there was 1.5 million approximately. And I think that was the only demonstration that just one news channel, I think it was CNN, reported on. But the rest, there was otherwise a complete media blackout, or whiteout, I would say, in the rest of the media. Meanwhile, when there would be demonstrations of a couple of hundred people, for example, or maybe 1,000 people in somewhere like Benghazi, at the most, I'd say 1,000, then all of the West major networks would be portraying this as a popular uprising against Muammar Gaddafi. So it was very surreal being there and watching the television every day, and what was in front of me. And I was working with the Libya media team as well, so I was very much welcomed into Tripoli and into Libyan society, and I was very privileged to have this experience and to learn from the Libyan people about what they were going through. And so it was very surreal, on the other hand, to be watching a completely different thing happening on the television. Well, first of all, this narrative that Gaddafi is a dictator, you know, is just shows a complete lack of respect amongst Western media or Western thought for other countries' histories, traditions, culture, where they come from. There wasn't a system of Western-style democracy in Libya, but, you know, in Britain, for example, we had an election very recently in London, where I think the turnout for the election was something like 35%, and the mayor of the city was elected with something like, I don't know, in total 13% of people who could vote voted for him, and he's the mayor of the city. So, you know, is that democracy? I don't know. But anyway, the first time that I visited Libya, I was really surprised to see a country that was you know, very well developed. Actually, Tripoli was a beautiful city, a very modern African city. It's the only country in the world, apart from Cuba, that I have been to where I haven't seen lots of homeless people in the streets, no people begging. It's not to say that there wasn't progress to be made in Libya and there wasn't poverty, etc. But people lived a very good standard of life. All children were in school, studying in university. People had access to free healthcare. They were a healthy and happy society. And that was very clear, even during the bombing, because even while Tripoli was being bombed every day, it was part of this kind of mentality of resistance that we're not going to let our day-to-day lives be affected. And so people were very much, I was there during Ramadan, the holy month, and people were trying as much as possible to carry on with celebrating. So I visited a number of Libyan schools that were in very, very good condition. And one of the other things that really struck me, for example, was the women. You could see very active in every part of Libyan society. You know, I've been to a number of Arab countries, and I was pleasantly surprised that in Libya, women appeared to be much more active in society, in the media, in academia, in education, in healthcare, in all sections of society, out on their own, without men, no problem, very safe, children out in the streets, very young, with no problems to their security. In England, you could never have children of 5, 6 years old running around the capital city without their parents.
The crisis now.
No, but because of their security, somebody would kidnap them. In Libya, the society was very healthy, so children would have no problems running around the city on their own. This is a sign, you know, some people say that the signs of a healthy society is how they look after their young people and their elderly people. And in Libya, the fact that children and old people were healthy and living a good quality of life is a very strong testimony to the kind of society that they had. And there was massive development going on in Tripoli at the time. There was huge construction going on, but of course when I arrived everything had stopped because all of the workers, a lot of them were Chinese or from other countries, and they had to flee because the embassies had withdrawn because it wasn't safe anymore. So that was very sad to see that this huge development projects that were going on had to stop. And obviously now we can see a lot of Libyan people that maybe before didn't maybe appreciate what they had. Now they can see what the value of what they had before, and there's been many people quoted in the media saying that, because of course now people can't access their money, they can't go out after a certain time because it's too dangerous. The country is run by militias, everybody has a weapon, death is normal, torture is normal. There are